Hey everybody, welcome to Toilet Day. Yes, this whole video is dedicated to composting toilets. So I can, talk crap all day and it's totally legit. So we're gonna look at the ABCs of composting toilets in general, just so you know what to do if you do want to do one yourself. We're gonna be looking specifically at ours, the creation of ours, the maintenance of ours, and basically the pros and cons to having a composting toilet. So strap in, have a seat, and let's get to it. So the composting toilet was pretty much always on the cards for us, if nothing else, just from the off-grid kind of convenience point of view. But really, there's actually stacks of really good reasons for going to composting toilets if you can, such as, so water conservation is an obvious kind of big one. Composting toilets don't require flushing water. For example, like the average family of 4 in Adelaide uses about 28,000 liters of fresh water, which is drinking quality water, which needs to be processed as such every single year. You know, no matter how you look at it, that's a lot of water just going down the toilet. On top of that, you have the sewer kind of system, which is a complex infrastructure, which requires experts to hook up to, or a septic system, which likewise is expensive and also needs someone to set it up for you and empty it. So, I mean, just the infrastructure alone and so on is like a huge kind of aspect. Not to mention compost toilet, you can do it yourself. You don't need like a plumber to plumb it in. They can work in different types of climates, adverse kind of situations where digging holes for plumbing and so on might be difficult, freezing pipes and what have you. If there's a water shortage, you're not stuck in that situation, contributing to that problem. And likewise, if there's a problem with the water service, it doesn't render your toilet unusable as well. Composting toilets, contrary to popular belief, are actually pretty good when it comes to odor, and actually probably from a hygiene point of view are even better than normal toilets because it's a dry area, not a wet area. And so you don't have backsplashing and water mixing with waste and possibly getting everywhere that you know you have to clean up quite well on a regular basis. Whereas in a dry system, you just don't have that. Pretty much a little spray of the bowl gets everything as clean as it needs to be. So this reduces the amount of maintenance and also bacteria that's floating around that you have to deal with. And lastly, it's a small thing, but you just have a silent system. When you use a composting toilet, there is no plopping and tinkling and a variety of other noises that echo through the house. Which definitely becomes a noticeable thing when you have guests or a toilet that's close to shared spaces, or you're not feeling that great and you're making extra noises, or if you just want a little bit of privacy. There's none of that. It's a very silent system. There's not repeated flushings if you have a household filled with people. So yeah, that's could be considered to be a significant thing as well. Oh, hi. Welcome to my toilet talk. Won't you have a seat? Yeah, toilet jokes aren't my favorite thing. They are a solid number 2, though. So obviously, it's not going to be something that anybody can just use, and not everybody will want to use. Considering commercial spaces or suburban homes, councils are not going to be getting in line to do composting toilets anytime soon, but certainly anywhere where you have a bit more space, maybe as a secondary toilet on a larger piece of property, anything semi-rural or rural, obviously. And then, maybe as more commercial kind of opportunities come into being, we'll be able to start seeing composting toilets in more common spaces. So in that light, what are the pros and cons, particularly of our system? The pros are absolutely that it's a fairly fuss-free system. You don't have to worry about clogging toilets. You don't have to worry about really like cleaning toilets or messy toilets, wetness, splashing, water flow, any of that kind of stuff. In our case, we really like the fact that it's a bit of a long drop. There are commercial systems that have a receptacle for the waste very close to your the actual toilet bowl itself. And sometimes it requires you to change it more often or turn a crank to mulch up the material, to empty a urine kind of a bucket or jug. And yeah, we have none of that kind of stuff. It's really kind of an easy system in that sense. Yeah, and I just really like the fact that it's pretty much odorless if you use it correctly, and yeah, quiet and clean. So from the con side, using a traditional toilet is just easier in the sense that you flush and go. Generally, depending on what you've dropped, what package you've dropped off. But with a composting toilet, obviously you have to cover the material, cover your waste with the composting material. So you have to have that on hand, and that has to also be refilled occasionally and acquired. You need to spray the bowl to clean it, and also just add a bacterial. We have a bacterial spray that actually starts breaking down and helping the composting in the bin down below. So yeah, it all takes a little bit more effort in terms of refilling the bottles, refilling the boxes, and just doing a couple of extra steps to make sure that you've covered everything properly. Because if you don't with a composting toilet, then that's where you'll start introducing smells and things like that. So then, of course, the other aspect to a composting toilet is the fact that you have to empty the actual waste bin that's underneath the toilet. And that probably happens every month and a half to 2 months, depending on how much use, how many people are around here, and so on. So yeah, obviously that's a bit of work. So let's go outside and have a look at what's involved. So we're outside having a look at our 2-bin system. Those 2 bins being this one that's been newly emptied, and it will be replacing this one, which is currently in use. So yeah, you kind of need the double up to be able to, unless you want to give yourself extra work, but the part of it as well is that you want to keep the old compost allowed to kind of ferment a little bit before burying it, because it's a little bit less unpleasant to bury very fresh stuff. Once it's been sitting for a couple of months, then you definitely get like something that looks much more like soil, even though it does still have like quite a few more months before it's kind of safe to use. Anyway, so we've got an empty bin, and all it's got in the bottom is basically I used a little plan, something I found online, because I wanted to use a rubbish bin. The original intent, of course, was to allow the liquids to drain out by this tap at the bottom here, and then the solids would get trapped inside the top part. And we needed a divider that allowed some of the moisture just to sort of slip through without anything else going through. So what I did was I did this kind of mesh thing here, which is basically just a grid of metal iron that I'd found, and then I just wrapped it with shade cloth. And so the shade cloth is just porous enough to allow the fluids through, and it seems to work really well. And luckily the grid that I fitted in there just happens to wedge about 2 inches from the bottom of the bin. So below that kind of line, I installed this tap, and then that allowed me initially to just attach something and then drain off the excess fluid into like kind of our grey water reed bed area or in some plants, and when it needed to go. And from what I've learned, that cocktail anyways of fluids mixed with some of the other organic material actually is quite a good fertilizer for the plants. So anyways, the next step is to sub out the old bin and put in the new one. So in my setup here, we've got this inline fan that goes straight inside the top of the bin, and I've just got it loosely held on here by a couple of clamps, which make it easier to remove. And then inside here we've got our main shaft that goes up to the toilet. This is just a rubber cowl that you usually put around like a flue pipe for a chimney, and this happens to work really well because it's rubber and it kind of grips this, so I don't have to actually have it attached. So when I actually want to just lift this off, it'll just stay attached to the pipe as I lift it off. So yeah, so you can see how that just stays there and gets out of the way. So down here inside the bin, we've just got this little cover that I've made, which allows the air to still pass through, but it keeps a little bit of the dry material, particularly sawdust and so on, from flying around and getting sucked up into the fan. So we just have to remove that in order to get the pipe out for the exhaust. And the only thing is the bin's quite heavy, so I have to carefully remove it from this space. And I won't show you the inside of the toilet because it's quite full, and I'm sure you don't want to see that. And that one's ready to go away, and this one's ready to go in. Basically just reversing the situation, so it's literally, you just slide it back down, do everything in reverse, fan goes in the hole, and yeah, so the whole process is pretty quick normally for this part of it. Because I've only got 2 bins, I have to empty the fresh bin first, and then, so that takes a little bit of time just because I've got to dig a hole. At the moment we don't have any, really good place to put it, so I just bury it. Right, so this is one of the first places I would have buried our compost from the toilet, and pretty much there's nothing here. There's no clumping or moisture anymore. There's no obvious signs of anything. The only thing that's left is a bit of sawdust. But yeah, I mean, really, it's just basically turned back into earth. So that's great to see. It's undoubtedly very rich, good earth for planting with. So yeah, we'll have to sort of dig some of this stuff up and start using it in the garden. So in early incarnations of our toilet fan had the pipe going up and emptying out just under the sill sideways, and I put it in a direction that I thought the rain would never get into, and of course the rain got into it. And I also had had to put a mesh over the end for bugs and stuff like that, and yeah, so it kind of evolved a little bit to this better kind of pipe at the top, which then protrudes above the house. That was the other problem, was the smell, of course, was sometimes catching in the wind and then guiding itself around to the windows. By putting it above the roof line properly and capped off from the weather, the smell dissipates really well, and we never smell what is coming up out of the pipe. So as you can see here, we had this kind of cool little setup that we were quite proud of and hoped that would work, and it worked out quite well actually. The excess covering material for our compost toilet. So on the inside, you'll see that the toilet has these 2 drawers above the toilet seat, and inside of it we had 2 different types of material, one for more liquids and one for more solids. Now the boxes we didn't want to be huge and heavy and so on, and didn't want to have a ton of stuff to have to haul inside the house, so we deliberately made the bins smaller with the intent that we could pull them out from the other side, the back side here, and then we could refill them from much larger bins. Now these large bins can probably hold, I haven't done an official measurement, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 liters per bin. So yeah, that means that we can put months worth of material in there, and then when we need to recharge the ones on the inside, we just have to come around back and pull them out from the back here and fill them up, which is actually pretty straightforward. And you just close that up, and then we've added a little weather stripping lip here, which means that the water was getting into this crack a little bit. When that's closed, that keeps the rain from getting in there, and then the rain here is on a bit of a sill that runs out the bottom. All right, let's get out of the bathroom, and I'll tell you a few of the tips and tricks that we've learned from the composting toilet experience that we've had. For starters, you should definitely choose something that suits the environment and maybe restrictions for your area, and definitely, just what works for you in terms of the size of household you have, and just how much involvement you want to have with the toilet system. I'd say if you have a big garden, you have space, you already are doing composting, then it's a fantastic nutrient-rich resource that you have at your disposal that you can just add to your garden beds. So there's some physical labor involved. That'll be another thing that may decide whether you want to be involved with doing this. The bin can get heavy depending on how full you let it go. We are currently digging ours into a hole, as you saw, so there's a little bit of digging and what have you as well. But it can actually be a lot simpler with some of the other commercial types of toilets. It kind of comes down to how much you want to spend as well. We kind of went with the most economical kind of version that we could create, which was based on sort of like the company Greenloo or similar, where they have like a canister system that takes everything. Now, some of them will divert liquids and solids better. Some of them will have a slow kind of churning system that happens that you don't have to do anything with, or maybe you have to press a button. That keeps the composting in motion and allows you to fill up the reservoir for a much longer period of time. That's less exchanging, and they have a special trolley to move that out and put a new one in. So it's a lot less labor intensive, and then you can leave the other one for long enough to decompose in the bin itself. So yeah, there's all those kind of things, but yeah, there's obviously a much higher cost associated with those specialty things. There's a company called Separate, which does a toilet which is much more self-contained, like I was mentioning, cartridge style, turning a crank, probably changing it much more frequently, but obviously lighter weight and easier to deal with. So yeah, it really depends on a number of factors. We happen to have the height, so we could fit a wheelie bin in. That was a contributing factor. Some tiny houses are going to be much lower to the ground, and while they do make systems like that, it's going to be a little more challenging if you don't have the space. Of course, there's the whole bucket loo system. A lot of people use that, where there's like a bucket directly below you. I've always liked a little bit of separation from my business and my backside, but some people it doesn't bother them, and then taking out a bucket is fairly straightforward, although it's a little more kind of in your face in terms of what you see and what you do with it. So yeah, you have to be a little bit, you can't be too squeamish with with it. If anything else, it gets you actually much more well acquainted with the natural order of things in terms of how your body works, and yeah, it's actually nothing to be too kind of crazy worried about. And certainly as it composts down, particularly with ours, after a couple of months, it's not fresh kind of in your face stuff. It's already turning into garden material. So if you do have enough space to do something similar to what we're doing, where you can either bury down a receptacle and have a long drop kind of scenario like ours, it's pretty straightforward actually. In our case, we knew the type of toilet we wanted, which was a pedestal style toilet that was already for composting toilet. Obviously, you can't use like a regular toilet because of the way that the drop works. And we knew the size of the tube that fit that particular toilet, so I was able to make a cut into the floor. In retrospect, I would have done that earlier on before I had put the subfloor in, which made things a lot more difficult. That was ridiculous. Cutting that hole was insane. But when you have that hole kind of cut out, then you can just slip your pre-made tube through there, and that is directly connected to the bin itself. So really, there's not much to tell in terms of installation. It's very, very straightforward, and literally anybody with DIY skills could do it, which is the great thing that you would not be able to do with a standard toilet. So in terms of our toilet, we definitely would have done probably a couple things a little bit more differently, which is what we're going to alter now with our new setup. In the second trailer that we have, P2, we are going to put P2 in there too. We're going to have the primary kind of pooping toilet, and then we're going to have a peeing toilet right next to it. So we're going to have two toilet seats. Now, we saw this system set up when we were doing some trips through intentional communities, and a number of people had this set up. And it's kind of a little bit more of a rustic way of doing things. But at the end of the day, it's just simplifies things a great deal, because a lot of even the commercial composting systems, they have strange diverters maybe built into the bowl itself, and it requires you to wee in a particular spot. It requires men to always sit down, which is not a big deal, but there's a lot of guys that will stand to do their business in the toilet. And And also, yeah, it just becomes a lot more fussy in terms of how the materials mix together and then how they're separated back out again in order to keep odors down and to keep things composting properly. Now, with our two toilet system, we will be able to do that very deliberately. And of course, the only problem would arise if somebody accidentally sat on the pee toilet and then had to do number two. So obviously, if you sat on the poo toilet, that's pretty much the anything goes toilet. So even if you had to do a wee in there, it's not the end of the world, as long as it's not generally used for that. So in the case of our system, then that would render our current toilet in this house in P1 as just a urine toilet. So we would replace the bin underneath with a funnel system. So basically, it would still drop down. It'll turn into a funnel with a hose, and then the hose will go into a ditch, which we will, fill with gravel and make it into a bit of a reed bed. Maybe blend it with the outgoing grey water that we have as well, which will sort of dilute that. And then in P2, we'll have the same sort of thing going on there for the wee toilet, but we'll have, in addition, the poo toilet, which is basically the same system as what we have in here now. So the only downside to that is that I set up all the composting material over here and all the special bins that we have and all that kind of stuff. And now is kind of rendered a little bit more useless now that we'll have to cart stuff over there or set something up like that on P2. Well, thanks for joining me on my toilet TED Talk. If I missed anything, then please comment below with questions or anything like you'd like to know. And yeah, definitely join us for other DIY or informative videos based on our place or minimalist sustainable living in general. And yeah, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.